Hey guys! Tonight we slip into a world of candlelight and cloistered stone, where the clink of wooden spoons echoes against the walls of an ancient monastery. You step into the refectory, long tables, flickering torches, and the faint smell of cabbage stew thick in the air. It's almost mealtime, and soon the bell will call everyone to dinner. Monks file in with the slow rhythm of habit, robes brushing the flagstones, sandals whispering like paper against dust. You probably won't survive this if you're used to drive-thrus and phone notifications, but for now, we'll pretend you've traded your earbuds for a hooded cowl. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're listening from, what city, what time zone, maybe even what's for your dinner tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The monastery's bell tolls just as the sun slips beneath the tree line. One deep note, then another, slow and deliberate, as if time itself has learned to move at a monastic pace. You find yourself in a place where even the sound of metal on wood feels sacred. The air is cool, and the scent of wax and smoke hangs like a benediction. Before anyone touches a bite, the abbot raises a hand. A hush settles, not the awkward silence of strangers, but the practiced stillness of men who've done this every evening for decades. You sit on the hard bench, the wood polished by centuries of robes. Dinner here isn't chaos, it's choreography. Every motion, every murmur, is part of an unwritten dance. You ladle a portion of thick vegetable pottage into a bowl carved from horn. The monks around you bow their heads as one voice begins to read aloud from a lectern, a passage from Augustine's Confessions. The Latin words rolling like the rhythm of waves, and that's the trick. In many monasteries, no one talks during dinner. Instead, one monk reads scripture or moral tales while the rest listen. Food and words feed body and soul in equal measure. But of course, you're wondering, if nobody speaks, what did they actually talk about? The answer, as always, depends on how you define talk. Silence wasn't the same as quiet. There were rules, very specific ones, about when and how communication could slip through. Monks used hand signs. Little gestures developed over centuries. 2 fingers to the lips meant bread, a palm to the chest meant water, and a twist of the wrist might mean pass the salt. You can imagine the dinner table like a medieval mime show, only holier. Historians still argue whether the vow of silence was meant to suppress gossip or simply to deepen focus on spiritual reflection. Either way, it created a kind of sacred tension, everyone together, yet each trapped inside their own thoughts. The fascinating part? That vow wasn't absolute. In some Benedictine orders, you could speak softly during certain meals or festivals. On feast days, especially after Lent, the refectory could sound almost cheerful, low chatter about gardens, new manuscripts, even complaints about the fish being too salty. The abbot might pretend not to hear, but everyone knew a little rule bending kept sanity intact. And what a scene it is, 100 bowls steaming with barley broth, the scratch of wooden spoons, the slow rhythm of chewing under the drone of holy text. The only light comes from candles that spit wax on the tables. Outside, wind rattles the shutters, and you can hear the faint call of a night bird. Inside, a reader's voice, steady and unbroken, fills the room with moral tales. Maybe tonight he's reading Lives of the Saints. Or maybe a warning about gluttony. Because, yes, monks worried about overeating too. There's a strange beauty in this order. Every sound matters. The creak of benches becomes a percussion line, the sighs of tired men become a choir. When you look down the long hall, you see discipline embodied, heads bowed, spoons moving in unison, the occasional cough breaking through like punctuation. It's as if the whole monastery breathes together, and yet, the human side never really disappears. Someone always sneezes too loudly. Someone drops a spoon, echoing like a thunderclap. Somewhere, a novice forgets himself and whispers, only to freeze under a dozen raised eyebrows. You can almost hear the thought forming, well, that's another week of kitchen duty. That's the quirky truth. Silence here wasn't about muting life, it was about tuning it. By stripping away small talk, the monks could turn dinner into meditation. Every bite became a reminder of humility. Every swallow a quiet thank you. You glance around and notice how sparse the room is. No paintings. No fancy carvings, just long wooden tables. A crucifix at the far end. And windows that glow like thin sheets of moonlight. The simplicity feels both serene and stifling. Imagine eating in near darkness. No chatter. No music, just you. Your bowl. And 100 other souls doing exactly the same thing. There's even an unspoken social choreography. Older monks sit closer to the abbot, novices near the kitchen door. No one dares start eating before the bell. And when the meal ends, a short prayer seals the silence before anyone rises. You can picture the abbot giving a small nod. The benches scraping back like a wave receding from shore. But beneath that quiet discipline lurks something fascinating. Conversation didn't die, it adapted. The monks became experts in subtext. A raised brow could mean agreement. A tilted head could mean dissent. Some even developed private sign languages more elaborate than anything officially allowed. It was the medieval equivalent of texting under the table. Historians still debate whether this silent ritual was universally followed or varied wildly between abbeys. In warmer climates, for instance, Mediterranean monasteries often allowed gentle conversation during meals. Especially when reading aloud wasn't practical. Northern orders, more austere, clung to silence like armor. One chronicler even wrote that a talkative monk is like an untamed horse, which might be true if horses could gossip about Latin grammar. And as you sit there, halfway through your bowl of stew, you feel that peculiar mixture of peace and pressure. The silence doesn't just hush the room, it amplifies everything else. You hear your own thoughts louder. Feel your stomach's rumble echo like a drumbeat. You start to notice the patterns of sound, a cough here, a swallow there, the tiny clatter of a ladle against the cauldron. In this stillness, you realize something. What monks talked about wasn't only with words. It was through glances, rituals, and shared stillness. The silence itself was their language. But wait. As the candles burn lower and the reading drifts to an end, a subtle change happens. A few monks glance at each other, faint smiles, quick nods. The spell of silence loosens. Just slightly. Someone mutters a short prayer under his breath. Someone else, braver, whispers about the weather. Or the garden's lettuce crop. Or how Brother John dropped the chalice again. And just like that, conversation returns. Not in full voice, but in whispers. Like embers under ash, you finish your meal, feeling oddly satisfied. It wasn't a feast, but something about the quiet fills you up. Around you, monks gather their bowls, stand in unison, and bow their heads before filing out into the cool night. The sound of sandals fades into the cloister. Dinner is over. But the night, and the stories whispered within it, are just beginning. The hush that follows dinner isn't emptiness, it's structure. You can almost hear the silence breathing, stretching its limbs as the monks file out from the refectory into the cloister walk. You follow, your sandals scuffing the flagstones, the evening air cool against your cheeks. The bell still hums faintly in your chest. You think it's all over, dinner, conversation, the day itself, but in truth, this is when the real dialogue begins. Not with words, but with gestures, glances, and centuries of quiet practice. You've heard of monks taking vows of silence, right? Everyone imagines a total, movie-level hush, grim-faced brothers communicating only through telepathy or divine intervention. But reality was far messier and, honestly, a lot funnier. The rule of silence wasn't a blanket ban on speaking, it was more like a carefully curated playlist of allowed and forbidden moments. You could speak on feast days. Sometimes in the workroom. Maybe even while herding the monastery's sheep. But during meals, worship, and the deep night hours, no dice. Instead, the monks built their own private code. A secret language of signs. Polished through generations until it became as natural as speech. You're sitting beside Brother Martin, who's gesturing with the precision of a stage actor, fingers together, palm flat. Then a flick of the wrist. You have no idea what it means. But across the table, Brother Hugh nods and passes him the salt. It's not magic, it's memory. Historians still argue whether these sign languages were spontaneous or systematized. Some orders, like the Cluniacs, had official glossaries, literal dictionaries of signs carved into the walls of their refectories or copied in their manuscripts. Others seem to have evolved locally, like regional dialects. A motion for bread might differ between abbeys only 100 miles apart. Imagine a monk from York visiting a house in Canterbury and accidentally asking for onions when he wanted ale. The fun part is how creative they got. There were signs for everything from cheese to latrine. Even for I need to confess. One monk in a 13th century record apparently devised a gesture for the abbots in a mood, which is both relatable and dangerously practical. And then, because human beings can't resist bending the rules, those gestures sometimes became a loophole for gossip. Want to complain about the quality of the pottage without technically speaking? Just mime a dramatic cough. Roll your eyes toward the kitchen. And everyone gets the message. Silent sarcasm, monk edition. A mainstream fact about this era, the Benedictine rule, written around the 6th century by Saint Benedict of Nursia, formed the backbone of monastic life for centuries. It doesn't outright ban speech, but it treats silence like a virtue as sacred as prayer. Let us do what the prophet says. Benedict writes, I said, I will take heed of my ways that I sin not with my tongue. Translation? Zip it. For the sake of your soul, you, sitting in this twilight world, start to realize how radical that is. Outside these walls, the medieval world is loud, market hawkers, blacksmiths, the clatter of carts, dogs barking, bells tolling every hour. Silence here isn't just peace, it's rebellion against noise, but even rebellion needs loopholes. Monks couldn't talk, sure, but they could hum. They could cough in rhythm. They could whistle faintly while working in the garden. And because these habits carried meaning, soon there were entire unspoken conversations happening during daily routines. Brother Peter's cough might mean you're taking too long, while Brother Matthew's exaggerated sigh translates as yes. Yes. I'll finish copying that page. Historians still debate whether the Church saw this silent communication as holy discipline or a necessary evil. Some abbots tolerated it as long as it kept the peace. Others punished even the smallest whisper, seeing talk as the gateway to temptation. One 12th century rulebook warns, he who loves idle words cannot love God. That's harsh, but in fairness, idle words in a monastery could spiral into politics, gossip, or forbidden desires faster than you'd think. Of course, not everyone took it so seriously. There are stories, half rumor, half legend, of monks turning the rule of silence into a game. One famous example comes from France, where a group of brothers reportedly held entire silent debates over dinner, using only gestures. The topic? Whether angels could laugh. You can almost picture it, one monk flapping his hands like wings, another miming giggles behind his sleeve, while the abbot sits there thinking, Lord, give me patience. You begin to notice how this silence changes the way you see. When speech disappears, the world sharpens. You hear the trickle of a fountain in the cloister garden, the shuffle of robes, the low crackle of torches along the stone corridor. Even your heartbeat feels too loud, and yet, that hush doesn't feel oppressive, it's oddly comforting. Every movement carries meaning. Every glance becomes a conversation. When Brother Thomas taps your shoulder and points to the sky, You follow his gaze to see the first star of evening. He smiles faintly. That's all. A full exchange. Wordless but complete. This vow of silence also served a social function. Imagine dozens of men living together day in and day out, copying manuscripts, praying, eating the same meals, sleeping in the same hall. Without some limits, chaos would be inevitable. Silence kept tempers from boiling over. It was, in modern terms, ancient noise cancelling. But here's a fringe tidbit: in some abbeys, breaking silence wasn't always punished. Instead, it was priced. A system of symbolic fines, extra prayers, or menial chores, allowed brothers to buy a few words when absolutely necessary. Need to discuss repairs to the mill? That'll cost you 2 Ave Marias. Want to gossip about a visiting noble? Better clear your confession schedule. Even the abbot wasn't immune. One chronicle tells of an abbot who broke his own silence so often that the brothers jokingly fined him daily, and he paid, just to keep talking. You could call it the medieval version of a chat subscription. As the evening deepens, you follow the monks into the cloister walk, where moonlight pools on the flagstones. A few birds mutter in the rafters. No one speaks, but you can sense the unspoken hum of thought. The rule of silence, for all its restraint, has created something miraculous, a shared consciousness. You feel part of a single, breathing organism, and then, from somewhere near the dormitory, a faint sound, a snort. Then stifled laughter. Someone's broken the silence. You see 2 novices struggling not to giggle, their shoulders shaking under their hoods. One of them had tripped on his robe. The abbot's shadow falls across the courtyard, and instantly the laughter dies. He says nothing, only raises one finger to his lips. The message is clear, yet even as he walks away, the faintest twitch of his mouth betrays a smile. Because deep down, even the holiest men understand, silence may be sacred. But laughter, well, that's divine too. You wake early the next morning, if wake is the right word for someone who barely slept on a straw mattress, and follow the scent of warm broth drifting from the kitchen. The monastery is already alive with quiet motion, the low clack of sandals on stone, the rhythmic clanging of a bell that marks the canonical hours. Today, you'll finally see what the monks actually eat, and what those mealtime silences are really about. The refectory is a long, echoing hall again, lit by slanted sunbeams instead of candlelight. The smell hits first, earthy, herbal, faintly smoky. Breakfast, or what passes for it, is simple, coarse bread, maybe a ladle of barley gruel, and a single hunk of cheese if the cows have been kind. No sugar, no coffee, no eggs sizzling in butter. Just humble fuel for prayer and labor. A mainstream fact: monastic diets followed the rule of Saint Benedict strictly. Meat from 4-legged animals was forbidden in most houses, though fish and fowl sometimes slipped through on feast days. The idea wasn't just piety, it was self-control. Food was meant to sustain, not delight. Eating should humble the body so the soul could listen more clearly. You dip your spoon into a bowl of pottage, vegetables boiled until they've given up any hope of texture. Carrots, leeks, turnips, maybe a stray pea if fortune smiles. It's bland, but strangely comforting. Like the edible version of a lullaby. You hear the scrape of spoons, the rhythmic swallow of 100 mouths eating as one. The silence feels fuller today, almost reverent. But here's the thing, behind every spoonful, there's conversation, just not the kind you can hear. Each monk knows where the ingredients came from. Which brother tended the garden? Who churned the butter? Who baked the bread? When you taste that stew, you're tasting community. Even if no one says a word, the food speaks for them. One fringe tidbit: some abbeys actually believed the spirit of obedience could be tasted. If a monk disobeyed or grumbled while cooking, the stew would lose its grace. There's a recorded instance from a Cistercian house where the cook had to remake the entire meal after an argument, because the prior insisted the vegetables had been spiritually spoiled. You can almost hear Gordon Ramsay screaming from across the centuries. Still, the monks had their small indulgences. On feast days, they'd open the cellar for ale, or serve a fillet of salted herring. Cheese was prized like treasure. Honey, when available, was practically dessert. And fruit, especially apples and figs, showed up only when the season allowed. It's not much, but in a life of routine, those small variations must have felt like fireworks. You notice Brother William across the table making the sign for bread. He receives a crust from Brother Matthew, who slides it down the bench with quiet precision. No words, just rhythm. Eating together here is more ritual than meal. A slow communion of hands and bowls, but even in this disciplined quiet, you can sense how conversation leaks through. You catch eyes meeting, half smiles trading, gestures flowing back and forth like ripples in still water. It's talk disguised as grace. Historians still argue whether monastic meals were intended to mortify the body or elevate the spirit. Some claim the near flavorless food was meant to dull earthly pleasure, while others think it created a meditative state, monks chewing slowly, synchronizing their breaths, reaching a strange kind of culinary mindfulness centuries before yoga retreats discovered it. One thing's certain, food shaped their spiritual rhythm. You can't separate the taste of pottage from the chant of prayers or the chill of morning stone. Each bite is an act of balance, between hunger and holiness, between simplicity and survival. But of course, human nature never stays entirely obedient. Beneath all the discipline, monks had cravings. There are letters and chronicles filled with complaints about undercooked beans, sour ale, or, my favorite, overly zealous fasting. One brother wrote, with understated fury, "The Lord will forgive hunger, but not negligence in the kitchen," and yet, they were creative with what they had. Many abbeys brewed their own beer, not as sin, but as sustenance. Ale was safer than water, full of calories, and, conveniently, mildly relaxing. The term liquid bread wasn't a metaphor, it was survival in a mug. Monks became some of Europe's first master brewers, and their recipes still influence Belgian and German monasteries today. If you've ever enjoyed a Trappist ale, you're tasting the afterglow of this quiet supper. You glance up toward the lectern. A reader is reciting a homily between spoonfuls, something about moderation and gratitude. His voice fills the room, smooth as candle wax, wrapping the silence in sound without breaking it. You realize that in a way, this is how monks spoke to one another, through scripture. Every word read aloud became a shared reflection. A monk might hear a passage about humility and think of Brother Thomas's endless bragging about his calligraphy, or about his own irritation with the weather. The text became conversation, inner and outer at once. A flicker of movement catches your eye. A cat, fat, striped, with the arrogance of one who knows he'll never be kicked out of heaven, struts down the aisle between benches. The monks ignore him, though a few smiles twitch under their hoods. Cats were common in monasteries. Unofficial mouse control and unofficial emotional support. There's even a famous Irish poem from the 9th century about a monk named Pongabon, who compares his writing to his cat's hunting. If you listen closely, you might hear that same contented hum now, the simple joy of routine, of purpose, of quiet companionship. Somewhere, a ladle clinks against a pot. The reader pauses, and all heads bow in prayer. The silence deepens. You feel your shoulders relax, your breathing slow. For a fleeting moment, you understand why they embraced this way of life. In this rhythm of fasting and feeding, of sound and stillness, the world makes a strange, calm sense. But just as you begin to drift into that serenity, someone's stomach growls, loudly. There's a faint ripple of suppressed laughter, like wind rustling through wheat. The reader clears his throat and continues as if nothing happened. You can't help but grin. Even holiness has hunger pains. By the time the bowls are cleared and the final bell rings, the monks are already rising, each moving in practiced silence. Outside, sunlight spills across the cloister garden. They'll spend the rest of the day copying texts, tending bees, or harvesting herbs. But tonight, when they return to this same hall, their quiet will carry new flavors, ink stains, soil under fingernails, maybe the faint sweetness of stolen honey, and you, sitting there in the afterglow of breakfast, realize something simple yet profound. In the monastery, food is never just food. It's conversation disguised as sustenance, prayer disguised as hunger, life disguised as routine. By evening, the monastery hums again with its soft, disciplined rhythm, bells, sandals, birds roosting in the eaves. You find yourself back in the refectory, bowl in hand, surrounded by men who've traded the noise of the world for the murmured comfort of Latin prayers. Tonight, though, the silence feels different. The reader at the lectern clears his throat, unrolls a parchment, and begins, not with scripture this time, but with a story. His voice fills the space between spoons and bowls, weaving narrative into dinner like another layer of bread. In the time of Saint Jerome, he begins, and immediately the room leans in. You feel the air change. Tonight, the monks are eating more than vegetables, they're consuming parable. The Benedictine rule allowed for readings during meals. But what was read varied wildly. Sometimes it was scripture. Yes, but other nights it might be a moral anecdote, a saint's biography, even a travel account. The goal was simple: feed the soul while feeding the body. You, sitting here, can't help but think it's the world's oldest podcast. A mainstream fact: monastic reading during meals was so sacred that the role of refectorian lector was considered an honor. The reader fasted beforehand, prayed for clarity, and had to enunciate perfectly, even over the sound of chewing. That alone deserves sainthood, but the content wasn't all divine thunder and moral doom. Some texts carried sly humor, a flicker of humanity among the holy. A story about a clumsy monk who mistook candle wax for cheese. A warning about greed illustrated with a cow that refused to give milk to dishonest milkers. The monks listened, eyes down. But you can feel their quiet amusement ripple through the benches. The reader's voice dips and rises, smooth as the rhythm of breath. He pauses just long enough for you to imagine the story unfolding in your own mind. There's something ancient and cinematic about it. The clatter of spoons becomes background percussion, the scrape of benches, a soundtrack, and every so often, between bites, between verses, a few murmurs slip through. They're not supposed to talk, of course, but monks have always been experts at breaking rules gently. You catch a whisper from your left. Two brothers debating whether Saint Martin really shared his cloak with a beggar or whether the tale had been embellished for effect. Historians still argue whether. You think, smiling to yourself, because even in this medieval hall, skepticism has a seat at the table. One monk, younger and less subtle, tries to hide a grin as the story turns absurd, a miracle goat that bows at prayer time. He nudges his neighbor, who gives him a slow, warning glance. The rule of silence might allow a few murmured words. But laughter? That's risky. Still, it bubbles up like soup too hot to contain. The reader continues, unfazed. And so the abbot said, better to lose one's meal than one's humility. The monks nod, half from reverence, half from fatigue. You chew, swallow, and feel the strange warmth of shared belief, even if no one truly agrees on what that belief means. There's comfort in routine. But you can't help noticing the small rebellions hidden in it. The way Brother Thomas mutters his prayers just loud enough for the abbot to hear his piety. The way Brother Peter's eyes flick toward the window, counting clouds instead of saints. You realize that this silent community is stitched together by tiny acts of personality. A fringe tidbit: some monasteries deliberately broke the silence once a week with what was called a collation, a short, supervised talk where monks discussed the readings, confessed doubts, or even swapped moral jokes. It was the medieval version of a discussion board, moderated by an abbot who acted like both therapist and forum admin. The word collation survives today, oddly enough, as a term for a light meal after evening prayers. So yes, dinner conversation has always been a spiritual minefield. You glance again at the reader. His voice falters for a moment, and you see his lips curve, barely. But there it is. Even he's enjoying this story more than he should. Maybe he's reading a moral fable about humility. But inside, he's secretly thinking about the irony of lecturing humility while everyone watches him perform. It's a very human contradiction, and that's what keeps this life from turning into pure stone. Historians still debate whether monks genuinely internalized these mealtime readings or simply endured them. Some argue that the constant exposure to scripture carved humility into their bones, others suggest it became background noise, like elevator music for the soul. But watching them now, you sense something more layered. Their silence isn't boredom, it's contemplation. Or maybe it's just digestion. In this world, who can tell the difference? The story ends, and a prayer begins. The reader folds his parchment with the care of one tucking in a sleeping child. Around the room, spoons rest, heads bow, eyes close. You whisper a prayer, too, though you're not entirely sure to whom. The rhythm of Latin phrases lulls you into stillness. Then, just as everyone rises to leave, Brother Martin leans close and mutters something so fast and quiet you almost miss it. Did he just say the goat talked? His neighbor snorts. A small puff of forbidden laughter. You both freeze as the abbot turns. His eyes sweep the room. A beat of tension. Then, with surprising gentleness, he says, "The goat had faith enough for all of you." The room erupts, not in laughter. Exactly. But in that soft ripple of amusement only men trained in silence can manage. The moment passes like incense smoke, fading into the rafters, as you follow the line of monks out into the cloister. The last traces of sunlight stain the stone orange. The stories, the prayers, the quiet humor, they all swirl together into something strangely alive. You realize that in this world, words are both precious and dangerous. Every syllable carries weight. Every whisper costs you a fragment of your vow, and yet, they keep talking anyway, in readings, in murmurs, in shared smiles over pottage. Because no matter how strict the silence, conversation always finds a way to survive. You spend the next morning in the scriptorium, where the air smells faintly of ink, dust, and candle soot. Rows of narrow desks stretch out like pews for parchment. Each monk bends over his page, quill in hand, murmuring softly, not prayers, but half-spoken syllables that help keep the rhythm of their writing. You've been granted a seat in the corner. Though the quill they hand you looks more like a weapon than a pen, it's quiet here, but not silent. The soundscape is mesmerizing, the faint rasp of pen nibs, the whisper of parchment being turned, the occasional sigh when ink blots or margins smudge. This is where the real gossip brews, not about kings or nobles, but about misspelled Latin and wonky illuminations. A mainstream fact: most monks in the Middle Ages weren't authors but copyists. They transcribed religious texts by hand, often for months at a time. A single Bible could take years. The work was considered holy. Every word a prayer in ink. Yet, between those pious lines, you can sense an entirely human world. You glance over at Brother Hugo, whose manuscript glows with jewel-toned pigments, lapis blues, ochre yellows, the green shimmer of ground malachite. He's illustrating a saint's halo, though his expression suggests mild artistic frustration. You notice a tiny sketch hidden in the margin, a snail chasing a knight. It's absurd, playful, and entirely intentional. Fringe tidbit: those marginal doodles, called marginalia, were the monks' secret jokes. Cats playing lutes, rabbits jousting, even a nun picking apples while a demon peers from the bushes. Historians still argue whether these were acts of rebellion, humor, or just long day boredom. But they give you a startling glimpse of monastic minds at play. Brother Hugo catches you staring and grins. He points to his page and whispers, "Even the saints need a laugh." You can't help but chuckle, though you quickly pretend it was a sneeze when the scriptorium master glances over. The vow of silence bends here, too. Like a quill tip under pressure, copying manuscripts required relentless focus. But that didn't stop monks from chatting in whispers or through gestures. They'd ask each other for ink, compare handwriting, and sometimes even compete. Whose script is holier? Became a low-stakes brag, especially among the younger brothers. You can imagine the shade. Brother Simon, your letters lean like a tired pilgrim. The work wasn't without danger. Candle flames, ink fumes, and long hours hunched over could ruin eyesight. Some monks wore tinted glass reading stones to magnify text, primitive spectacles centuries before opticians existed. Others complained of neck pain and finger cramps. One exasperated monk even wrote in the margin of a manuscript, "It is cold. My hand aches. And the parchment is hairy." Historians still debate whether these complaints were genuine journal entries or intentionally comic inserts, a kind of medieval stand-up routine scrawled between psalms. Either way, you can almost hear the sighs echoing through time, but amid the fatigue, camaraderie thrived. The scriptorium wasn't just a workplace, it was a community bound by ink and patience. Brothers traded jokes in Latin puns, the kind that make sense only if you've spent too long conjugating verbs. One classic went: scribe, scribis, scribit. He writes, you write. I am written out. Monastic comedy at its finest. You look up at the windows, narrow slits of pale light, just enough to read by. Dust motes swirl like tiny stars. Every so often, a bird lands on the sill, pecks at a crumb, then vanishes again. The rhythm of life outside feels impossibly distant. Yet the monks inside seem content, anchored in repetition. Still, beneath the calm, something rebellious flickers. These men may have vowed silence, but the margins of their manuscripts prove they never stopped talking. A doodle of a monk chasing a pig says more than any sermon about hunger. A line of poetry written upside down could be a private confession, or a joke, or both, and every so often, you catch snippets of their unspoken hierarchy. The older brothers get the illuminated works, gold leaf, careful script. The novices copy inventories, letters, or sermon drafts. Yet even here, ego sneaks in. You can sense which monk wants his handwriting remembered, whose calligraphy borders on pride. One young scribe, Brother Oswin, keeps glancing toward the abbot's desk. You watch him carefully add extra flourishes to his capital letters, ornate curls that glitter faintly in the light. When the abbot passes, Oswin straightens, pretending piety. The abbot merely raises an eyebrow and murmurs, "Modesty, my son, is best written plain." The other monks smirk in their sleeves. It's a gentle burn. Monastic edition, then. A sudden commotion. Brother Gerald sneezes so loudly he splatters ink across a psalm. The entire room freezes. The black stain spreads across, ominous, dark and blasphemous. For a second, no one breathes. Then, quietly, the scriptorium master sighs. Well, God's name has been written twice. Relief floods the room in the form of silent laughter. That's the balance this place lives on, reverence and mischief, obedience and humanity. They might copy sacred texts, but they live between the lines. A few hours pass, and you begin to feel the trance of the work. The steady motion of quills, the scent of parchment, the faint murmur of prayers. It's hypnotic. You understand why some monks called the scriptorium a school of patience. Each word written is an act of faith in slowness itself. Outside, the bell rings for the next meal. Quills are laid down, parchment covered, lamps snuffed. As the monks rise, stretching stiff backs, You notice the faint stains on their fingers, ink that never fully washes away. It's a badge of service, of devotion, maybe even quiet pride. You follow them out, glancing back once more at the half-finished manuscripts glowing in the dim light. Somewhere among those pages, a joke about a snail, a doodle of a mischievous cat, a line of human frustration, all tiny rebellions preserved in ink. You realize that while the monks may have been sworn to silence, they found ways to speak that lasted centuries longer than any words aloud. The dinner conversations you came for? They're right here, in the margins, in the humor, in the small imperfections that turn scripture into story. You file into the refectory again that evening. And by now you know the rhythm. The bell tolls. Sandals shuffle. Wooden benches creak. But tonight, the hush feels slightly warmer. There's a spark beneath the solemn routine, like the faint hum of laughter pressed under locked lips. Because yes, even in God's house, gossip finds a way. At the far end of the hall, Brother Martin clears his throat, a sound that means, in monkish Morse code, something juicy incoming. You lean a little closer. Talking at dinner is technically forbidden, but rules bend in curious ways. The monks have perfected the art of communicating with gestures, coded looks, and quiet murmurs that travel only as far as the next bowl of stew. The mainstream fact first, medieval monasteries often banned speech during meals. Instead, one monk read aloud from scripture or the lives of saints while the rest ate in silence. But silence rarely meant stillness. A raised eyebrow, a cough, or a well-timed clatter of spoon and bowl could say plenty. Brother Martin starts miming, a scandal. By the look of it, he clasps his hands, makes a mock halo above his head, then does a guilty glance left and right. The monk across from him stifles a laugh, nearly inhaling his bread crust. You piece it together. Someone from the nearby village, perhaps the miller's daughter, was seen visiting the monastery gate twice this week. For donations, she claimed. The knowing smiles suggest otherwise. Fringe tidbit, some monasteries actually kept informal rumor lists, a kind of internal journal of who said what, who looked where, and who got caught sneaking extra honey. They weren't official, of course, but historians have found scraps in marginal notes that hint at these shadow records. One even reads, Brother Anselm talks too freely of women's shoes. The reader at the lectern clears his throat, announcing the next passage, something about humility and the mortification of the flesh. The irony nearly breaks the table. You can almost hear the collective effort not to laugh. It's like being in class when someone drops a pencil and you're all pretending to still take notes. A monk beside you slides a tiny crumb of cheese toward your bowl with a wink. Sharing food is a small rebellion too, a signal of friendship. In a place where every act is supposed to serve the divine, small human gestures shine brighter. The topic drifts, through signals and whispers, to Brother Clement's snoring. Apparently, it echoes so loudly in the dormitory that one novice thought the devil was roaring beneath the floorboards. Brother Clement, catching the glance, looks up from his bread and shrugs. Better me than the devil, he mouths, then crosses himself just in case. Historians still argue whether monastic gossip should be seen as sinful weakness or social glue. Some records condemn it as idle talk, while others imply it kept morale alive in otherwise austere lives. You suspect the truth lies somewhere between the two. Holy men, still human, building community through murmurs. You notice how carefully the monks balance curiosity and caution. Too much talking invites discipline, too little, and the soul starves for company. They navigate this like tightrope walkers over a sea of scripture. Even the abbot isn't immune. When he passes behind the benches, the conversations drop to the sound of spoons scraping bowls. But the moment his robe swishes out of earshot, eyebrows rise again. The secret theatre resumes. Brother Oswin, the ambitious scribe you met earlier, starts gesturing about a missing jar of honey. He points at Brother Hugo, who feigns innocence with exaggerated piety, hands folded, eyes skyward. Then he mimes a bee buzzing near Hugo's lips. You nearly lose it. The entire row starts to shake with silent laughter. Spoons trembling in broth. To keep order, one monk signals peace by crossing two fingers, a reminder to hush. But even that becomes part of the fun. The sign passes down the table like a wave. Mock serious. Ending in a few chuckles when Brother Gerald pretends to faint dramatically from guilt. Then the reader pauses. The hall stills. He's reached a passage about the sins of the tongue, how gossip corrupts the pure and tempts the weak. You can feel the collective smirk ripple through the benches. The timing couldn't be better, and yet, there's something touching beneath the humor. These fragments of chatter, snoring, missing honey, visiting strangers, are the heartbeat of a closed world. Without them, life here might dissolve into grey devotion. Each whispered story keeps the monks tethered to the earth they're supposed to transcend. A bowl slips from someone's hands, clattering across the table. The noise is like thunder. Heads whip around. And the culprit, poor Brother Luke, flushes crimson. The abbot turns slowly, expression unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, he says, "We shall pray for steadier hands," and walks on. The tension melts into laughter muffled by sleeves. As the meal winds down, you realize gossip here isn't about malice. It's storytelling in disguise, an outlet for humor, empathy, and connection. When they whisper about each other, they're also affirming each other's existence. Once, a novice confides in you that the best part of gossiping is not the secret itself, but the thrill of being heard at all. God listens, he says with a shrug. But sometimes you want someone who nods. The bell signals the end of dinner. Benches scrape. Bowls stack. Candles gutter. The monks file out in pairs, still mouthing silent jokes. Brother Martin glances back at you and raises one eyebrow, the universal signal for "you'll never guess what I heard next." You grin but stay quiet. There's comfort in knowing that even behind vows, the simple human urge to connect never truly dies. The monastery might demand stillness, but the laughter still hums between the stones. You wake before dawn to the sound of thunder, soft at first, then rolling through the valley like a distant drum beat. By breakfast, the storm has passed, leaving a grey, swollen sky and puddles reflecting the monastery's stone walls. The monks gather under the cloister arches, watching clouds drag themselves across the hills. The talk, of course, turns to weather, and all the strange meanings it might carry. You've noticed by now that medieval monks see weather not just as atmosphere, but as divine conversation. A sunny day, God's favor. A sudden hailstorm, perhaps a warning. And this morning, after a night of restless lightning, everyone seems quietly on edge. Brother Hugo points toward the horizon, muttering about how the clouds look unnatural. Brother Martin, ever the dramatic one, insists it's a sign of something, a reckoning. Perhaps. Then Brother Gerald leans in and whispers, "Or just bad wind from the east." He grins, spooning oats into his mouth with monkish nonchalance. The mainstream fact, medieval people, monks included, genuinely believed that weather reflected God's mood. The church even had weather prayers, asking for relief from droughts, storms, or pestilence. Some monasteries kept records of these patterns in chronicles, noting years when the sky turned strange or the rain refused to stop. But there's a fringe tidbit too. Many monks quietly entertained folk explanations. One chronicler wrote that fiery comets were dragons spitting light. Another swore that thunder came from angels battling demons above the clouds. And though the church discouraged superstition, the line between faith and folklore was blurry in practice. You overhear Brother Oswin whispering about a nearby village that's lost half its sheep. "Rotten air," he says. "The same as last time the plague came." The word plague hangs in the air like incense smoke, thick, uneasy, unspoken. Historians still argue whether monks truly believed in miasma, bad air spreading disease, or merely repeated what villagers told them. But as you watch the brothers clutch their cloaks tighter, It's clear that fear, like weather, seeps through walls. They move to the refectory for the noon meal. Rain still dripping from the eaves. A single candle burns on each table, its flame shivering with every draught. The reader for today, Brother Luke, the one with the butterfingers, recites a text about Noah and the flood. The timing feels suspiciously intentional. You imagine him picking it from the library shelf with a mischievous grin. The monks eat in near silence, save for the occasional sniff or cough. Between spoonfuls of thin lentil soup, you catch the rustle of private commentary. Brother Martin mouths, "If it rains another week, we'll need an ark." Hugo adds, "You can be the dove, then," pointing at Martin's perpetually raised eyebrows. It's barely a joke, but it ripples down the benches like a quiet wave of relief. Weather, after all, is safe gossip. It's technically not forbidden talk, yet rich with meaning. They use it as a stand-in for deeper worries. When a monk says, "The sun feels angry," he might really mean, "Our crops are failing." When he says, "The frost lingers too long," he might mean, "God seems distant lately." Later that day, in the garden, you join Brother Clement as he tends to a patch of cabbages shimmering with rainwater. He's the oldest in the monastery, with a beard that looks like it's been growing since the first crusade. He pokes the soil and says softly, "If the sky's angry, the earth sulks." You ask if he really believes storms are divine punishment. He chuckles. "Sometimes," he says, "a storm's just a storm. But sometimes," he trails off, eyes drifting upward, "sometimes God likes to remind us he's still watching." Then, with a wink, "And sometimes he's just watering the beans." That's the tone here, half faith, half folklore. You can sense centuries of uncertainty wrapped in calm acceptance. These men pray for protection, but they also keep an ear out for thunder that sounds different, or wind that speaks. As dusk approaches, the rain returns, soft at first, then drumming harder against the windows. Dinner begins early. The candles hiss as droplets slip through the cracks in the roof. Brother Luke reads again, his voice slow and steady over the patter. This time it's a sermon about job, patience, and suffering. You can tell everyone's listening with a touch more empathy than usual. When lightning flashes, the room glows momentarily golden, then falls back into shadow. A few monks cross themselves, one mutters a prayer under his breath. It's both eerie and intimate, like sharing a meal inside the lungs of the world. And then, from the back of the hall, a voice barely above a whisper, they say a comet's been seen over France. A ripple passes through the benches. Someone adds, "A sign of war." Someone else says, "Or plague again." Brother Hugo rolls his eyes. Or maybe France just needs a bath. The laughter breaks the tension, even earning a rare smirk from the abbot, but the fear lingers. For all their devotion, the monks can't help wondering what the sky's trying to say. When crops fail, when storms flood a granary, when lightning strikes a chapel tower, it feels personal. After dinner, you follow them into the cloister. The rain has stopped, leaving behind the smell of wet stone and rosemary. Water drips from the arches in slow, rhythmic beats. Somewhere, a frog croaks, a small, absurd reminder that life keeps croaking along. No matter what portents hang above, Brother Clement hums a low tune as he walks. Storms come, he says, and storms go. If we talked of nothing but sin every day, even God would be bored. The others chuckle softly. Maybe that's what their weather talk really is, a way of keeping boredom and fear at bay, of finding patterns where none may exist. The world beyond the cloister feels vast and unpredictable. But inside these walls, even thunder has meaning. By the time you reach your cell, the clouds have thinned to silver wisps. Moonlight spills through the narrow window. You think about how the monks interpret everything, the sky, the soil, even silence itself, as divine conversation. Maybe that's what makes their world both beautiful and exhausting. Nothing ever just is. Every drop of rain, Every gust of wind could be God whispering, or laughing. You hear about him before you see him, the stranger at the gate. The porter, a kindly monk with a nose red from years of wind and wine, announces it just before the evening bell. A pilgrim seeks shelter. That phrase, in monastery language, means curiosity for everyone. The monks, bound by hospitality, always welcomed travelers. But a guest means fresh stories. And after days of routine prayers and pottage, that's a treasure. You follow the group toward the entrance, where a cloaked figure stands dripping in the fading light. Mud clings to his boots. His cloak smells faintly of smoke, and his staff bears small trinkets tied with colored string. He bows, murmurs a Latin blessing slightly off-key, and the brothers usher him in. The abbot, tall and serene, offers a nod. Feed him. Warm him. Then we'll hear his tale. You can practically feel the collective spark of anticipation ripple through the hall. The pilgrim eats first, a bowl of broth, coarse bread, and a generous spoonful of honey. The missing honey jar, you suspect, makes a discreet reappearance. As he eats, the monks glance up from their own meals, pretending disinterest while straining to hear every word. When his bowl is empty, he begins. I've come from Santiago, he says, by way of Rouen and the Pyrenees. My feet are blistered, my faith tested, and my ears full of nonsense from taverns. That last part earns a few hidden smiles. The mainstream fact, pilgrims were common sights in the medieval world. They traveled to holy shrines like Compostela, Canterbury, or Rome, often carrying badges to prove their devotion. Monasteries along major routes offered food and lodging, a sacred duty called hospitium. But here's the fringe tidbit, pilgrims weren't always as saintly as they sounded. Some were spies, some con men, and some just wanderers chasing adventure. Monks learned to take every miracle tale with a pinch of blessed salt. The pilgrim leans closer to the fire, warming his hands. You should have seen it, he says. In Toulouse, a relic of St. Martha's veil, claimed to heal blindness. People lined the streets. One man said he saw light after 20 years of dark. Brother Hugo murmurs, or maybe someone just opened the shutters. A few suppressed snickers ripple down the benches. The pilgrim grins. He's no fool. Ah, you're skeptics, he says. Good. Let me tell you something less holy. His tone drops conspiratorially. In Spain, they sell pebbles from the river Jordan. 10 deniers a handful. I saw one merchant bless his cart by sneezing over it. The monks can't help it, they laugh. Properly. Out loud. The abbot clears his throat. But even he's smiling. You notice how the pilgrim's stories unlock something in the room. For the first time in days, the monks speak freely, asking about distant lands, strange dialects, whether the sea truly roars or if that's just poetry. They're like children pressing their faces to a window of the world. Brother Martin, always the instigator, leans forward. And what miracles did you witness? The pilgrim shrugs. I saw a man sell his cloak to feed a stranger. That felt miraculous enough. That line settles over the room like soft dust. The monks nod slowly. It's the kind of humility that even the abbot can't scold. Still, a few can't resist testing him. You claim to have walked from Spain, says Brother Oswin. How do we know you're not one of those false pilgrims, thieves in God's clothing? The pilgrim laughs. Because, brother, if I were a thief, I'd have stolen your sandals by now. The hall erupts again in quiet laughter. Even Oswin grins. Albeit grudgingly, historians still argue whether pilgrims were genuinely devout travelers or simply the medieval equivalent of backpackers seeking purpose. Many likely were both. Some went to fulfill vows or seek healing, others went for trade, escape, or just the thrill of movement in a world that rarely changed. The monk at the lectern, who's usually the dinner reader, closes his book for once. It's a small rebellion. but it tells you everything. You've reached the kind of evening when even rules pause to listen. The pilgrim speaks of markets where oranges glow like jewels, of cities where bells sound different, and of one monastery where monks drink wine thick as syrup and twice as forgiving. That last line earns an audible sigh from Brother Clement. You find yourself lulled by the rhythm of his voice, the way he moves between sacred awe and earthy humor. For a moment, you forget the rules, the vows, the walls. You're traveling too, through his words. Then, the inevitable twist. Not all who walk holy roads are holy. He says quietly, I met one who sold indulgences with one hand and stole from pilgrims with the other. When I confronted him, he said, even sin keeps the church fed. The room falls still. It's not anger, but recognition. Everyone here has wrestled with that tension between purity and practicality. Brother Hugo finally breaks the silence. Maybe he wasn't wrong. God feeds the sparrows, even the greedy ones. The pilgrim smiles sadly. Then may he forgive me, for I have eaten well today. The abbot rises, signaling the end of dinner. You have traveled far, he says. Rest, and tomorrow share what else you've seen. Truth and nonsense alike have their place. As the monks escort the pilgrim to the guest quarters, the room buzzes softly with afterthoughts. A few debate whether relics truly hold power. Others wonder what oranges taste like. One or two simply marvel that the world beyond the cloister still spins, still shines. You linger by the dying fire. The warmth is fading, but your mind is alive with echoes, pilgrims, relics, distant markets. The monastery feels less like a fortress tonight and more like a harbor, open for a moment to the winds of the world. In that flickering light, you realize something subtle. Dinner talk isn't always about food or gossip. Sometimes it's about remembering the world's size, so they don't forget their own smallness within it. The next evening feels different, charged, like the air before a summer storm. The pilgrim has settled into the guest cell, and his stories still hum in the monks' minds like the echo of a bell. At supper, the refectory candles seem to burn a little brighter, the glances across the table a little bolder. Perhaps it's the taste of worldliness he brought in. Or perhaps it's just human nature, too many ideas, not enough outlets. Either way, tonight, the talk drifts from gossip to theology. Dangerous territory. It starts innocently enough. Brother Hugo, still chuckling about the pilgrim's relic tales, says, if men can sell pebbles as holy, perhaps holiness is only belief. Brother Roswin looks up sharply. Belief shapes holiness, he counters. Without belief, even a saint's bone is just dust. A few spoons pause midair. The debate door has creaked open, and everyone knows where this path leads. The mainstream fact: monks in the Middle Ages were often scholars, theologians, or teachers. Monasteries doubled as intellectual centers, housing some of the only literate men in Europe. Debating theology wasn't rebellion, it was part of study. But after supper, in hushed tones over soup, that was walking the line. Brother Martin can't resist stirring things further. So tell me, he says with mock seriousness, if belief defines holiness, does a cat's purr count as prayer? Laughter ripples through the room. But Oswin, ever precise, answers, a cat lacks reason. It can't pray. Martin shrugs. Maybe it just doesn't need to. You watch the abbot's jaw tighten ever so slightly. He doesn't interrupt, yet. Fringe tidbit: some medieval monks did debate whether animals had souls. Theologians like Thomas Aquinas argued that animals were driven by instinct, not reason. But folklore, and a few brave monks, insisted that certain creatures, cats especially, showed signs of divine spark. One manuscript even records a monk writing, "My cat listens to psalms with greater devotion than I." The conversation deepens. Brother Clement, old and gentle, speaks next. When I look at the fields, he says, and see birds rise all at once like prayers taking wing, I can't help but think God hears them too. Historians still argue whether such musings were tolerated or quietly discouraged. The line between piety and heresy was thin as parchment. Brother Luke, the soft-spoken reader, dares to ask, if God made all things, then mustn't all things reflect his image, even cats? The room holds its breath. Oswin looks scandalized. Hugo looks delighted. The abbot finally clears his throat. Brothers, he says evenly, let's not grant the devil's creatures more theology than they can chew. The laughter that follows is polite. But under it you sense the thrill of skirting danger. These debates are forbidden fruit, sweet, risky, irresistible. Once the abbot resumes eating, Hugo leans closer and whispers, historians of the future will thank us for this. You nearly choke on your stew. He's half right. Many monastic debates later became the foundation for medieval philosophy. The questions asked at wooden tables by candlelight shaped arguments that would echo for centuries. But in the moment, they're just tired men trying to make sense of a world where faith and reason wrestle nightly. The topic shifts, as these things do, from cats to free will. Brother Martin asks, if everything is God's will, then can we ever truly sin? Oswin, predictably, clutches his spoon like a sword. We sin because we choose. He insists. Free will is the test. Clement shakes his head. Or maybe free will's the trick, God's way of making sure we trip over our own pride. The hall fills with murmurs. It's no longer a debate but a low storm of ideas. Gentle yet restless, Brother Gerald adds quietly. If God knows what we'll choose before we choose it, is it still a choice? No one answers right away. That's the question, isn't it? The one even the most learned scholars never really pinned down. Historians still argue whether monks genuinely doubted or simply enjoyed the intellectual play. Doubt wasn't heresy unless it turned to denial, but how do you measure that line in candlelight? The abbot finally smiles, weary but amused. Brothers, you sound like Paris scholars with too much ink and too little sleep. Eat your bread. God will sort your logic after Compline. The tone softens. The debate dissolves into chuckles. But the glimmer of thought remains. You can see it in their eyes, the pleasure of questioning, of brushing fingertips against mystery. Later, as the dishes are cleared, Brother Martin mutters, if cats have souls, I hope mine prays for my portion of honey tomorrow. Hugo whispers back, only if your cat can read Latin. The laughter that follows is softer this time. Tired, content. When the bell rings for night prayers, they rise in near silence. The pilgrim, still awake, leaning in the doorway, smiles faintly. You monks argue like poets, he says. Hugo shrugs. We argue because the world's too quiet otherwise. As you follow them toward the chapel, you realize these debates are more than idle chatter. They're how the monks stay alive inside, testing faith not to break it, but to understand it. They speak softly, but their questions echo through the stone halls long after the candles die. And maybe that's the truest miracle here, that even in a world ruled by obedience, the mind still dares to wander. The next evening carries a subtle tension, like the calm after lightning has struck too close. The monks file into the refectory, shoulders hunched against the cold draught sneaking through the high windows. The conversation from last night still lingers in the air, half remembered, half suspect. You can feel it in the way Brother Oswin won't meet anyone's eye and how Brother Martin hums under his breath just a little too cheerfully, pretending everything is fine. Tonight's meal is lentil pottage again, thick, beige, reliable. The smell of sage and onion fills the hall, comforting and monotonous, as if trying to smother the restless curiosity of the night before. But of course, curiosity doesn't die easily in a monastery. It just finds new disguises. The evening's reader starts with a familiar passage, a moral tale from the dialogues of Gregory the Great. It's about a hermit who lived so purely that even the animals brought him food. Midway through, Brother Hugo snorts into his bowl. There it is again. He mutters, the holy man and his helpful bear. You'd think every saint had a pet zoo, A few smothered chuckles follow. The abbot's eyebrows rise like warning flags. But he doesn't stop them. Humor, after all, is a safety valve. That's your mainstream fact for the night. Many saints' lives, especially in the medieval period, featured animals that behaved with miraculous obedience. Birds fetching bread. Wolves becoming guardians. Even fish carrying messages. To the monks, these weren't fairy tales but signs of divine harmony, proof that creation itself could recognize holiness. Still, the question lingers, were these stories meant to inspire or entertain? Brother Martin tilts his head. I'd take a wolf over a novice any day, he says dryly. Less talking back. The laughter this time is genuine, rolling softly down the table like warm honey. But then Brother Clement, voice calm and serious, says, maybe those beasts behaved because they saw what we forget, that holiness makes the world gentle. A long pause follows. You can almost hear the fire crackle from the kitchen hearth. Brother Roswin clears his throat. Or maybe those stories were exaggerated, meant to teach, not describe. His tone is cautious, testing the air like a cat's paw, and there it is, the unspoken word, myth. The monks all know that some stories are just too tidy, too convenient. But to say it aloud risks unraveling something sacred. Historians still argue whether monks themselves believed every miracle recorded in the Vitae Sanctorum, the lives of the saints, or whether they knowingly wrote them as moral parables. Some evidence suggests both were true at once, faith and fiction intertwined like candle smoke. Brother Gerald adds softly, even if the wolf never came, maybe the lesson did. Hugo grins. So you're saying the wolf was symbolic? In that case, can my dinner be symbolic too? Clement smiles. Only if your stomach agrees. A wave of chuckles warms the hall again, breaking the tension. Humor, faith, doubt, they all sit side by side, sharing the same bread. Then the pilgrim speaks up from the guest bench. I once saw a monk in Burgundy who claimed a goose confessed its sins to him. Every head turns. A goose? Martin asks, eyes gleaming. Did it also do penance? The pilgrim grins. He said it stopped honking on Sundays. Even the abbot laughs this time, a short, genuine sound. Gone as soon as it appears. That's your quirky tidbit. Animal confessions were not unheard of in medieval law. In some court records, pigs and dogs were literally put on trial for crimes, complete with lawyers and witnesses. To modern ears, it sounds absurd. To medieval minds, justice extended to all creatures under God. Brother Roswin, still uneasy, mutters, we should speak of doctrine, not fables. But Martin shakes his head. Doctrine keeps us steady. Fables keep us awake. You sense something shift again, an understanding that these stories, however improbable, give shape to the monks' lives. They're maps of meaning, guiding the imagination through long hours of silence. The abbot, perhaps sensing this too, finally speaks. Brothers, let us not forget that laughter may honor God as much as fasting. If it brings kindness, that quiets the room. But in a gentle way. It's permission, wrapped in authority. You can feel everyone exhale. Later, as bread is passed around, the talk softens into whispers about old abbots, odd relics, and the kinds of miracles that never made it into books. Brother Gerald mentions a rumor that one monastery in Normandy had a candle that never burned down. Brother Hugo insists it was just whale fat and wishful thinking. Historians still argue whether such perpetual lights were symbolic inventions or physical phenomena misunderstood. Whatever the truth, the image of eternal light captures something the monks crave, a small, enduring miracle in a flickering world. When the meal ends, the abbot rises. Brothers, he says, the tongue may lead astray, but it may also lead home. Guard it well. They bow, scrape their benches back, and file out, cowls brushing against one another like soft waves. The candles sputter in their wake, leaving thin trails of smoke. You follow them toward the cloister, where moonlight paints the stone silver blue. The night is sharp, the air clean. Someone hums a psalm as they walk, and the sound drifts up into the rafters, half prayer, half lullaby. It's a strange comfort, realizing that even in their doubts and jokes, these monks are always circling the same mystery: how to live rightly in a world that makes no promises. They debate, they laugh, they worry, but always, beneath it all, they return to the rhythm of faith like waves to shore. You think of the goose, the wolf, the endless candle, and smile. Maybe holiness isn't about certainty. Maybe it's about the courage to keep asking, even when the answers make you laugh. The following evening arrives under the hush of rain. Fat drops patter against the leaded windows, and the sound fills the monastery like an organ played by nature herself. The world beyond the walls feels far away, softened by mist and water. Inside, the monks move slower, heavier, their robes damp at the hem from fetching firewood or tending the herb garden between showers. Tonight's supper smells of comfort, barley soup with leeks and a hint of nutmeg. The air hums with the kind of coziness that only rain can bring. You can almost feel your eyelids grow heavier just watching the steam rise from the bowls, but comfort has a way of loosening tongues. And tonight, with thunder grumbling in the distance, the talk turns to confession, not just the ritual kind, but the personal sort. Whispered between bites, Brother Martin, never shy, starts it. I once nodded off during prime, he admits, eyes twinkling, dreamed I was chanting perfectly, woke up snoring through the psalm. The laughter that follows is deep and contagious. Even the abbot smiles, which is saying something. Your mainstream fact for the night: medieval monks confessed not only sins of action but also of thought, temptations, distractions, even drowsiness during prayer. Falling asleep mid-service counted as spiritual negligence. Chronic sleepiness could even earn penance. Imagine being assigned extra prayers because your eyelids betrayed you. Brother Oswin, predictably solemn, says, better to confess than conceal. A sleepy monk invites the devil to whisper. Hugo raises an eyebrow. If the devil wants to whisper, he'll have to speak over the snoring. That earns another round of laughter. The abbot taps his spoon lightly against his bowl. Not as a rebuke but a reminder: balance amusement and reverence. Like salt in soup. Then Brother Clement sighs softly. I once confessed to envying a lay brother's bread. He glances up, half embarrassed. He baked it with honey. I told myself it was for the angels. But I wanted a slice. A small smile ripples through the table. There's something disarming about hearing holy men admit to such humble cravings. That's your quirky tidbit. Envy of bread was a surprisingly common confession in some monasteries. During fasting periods, when meals were plain, the smell of fresh loaves from the guesthouse could send monks into genuine spiritual crisis. One record from a 13th century abbey lists coveting kitchen smells as a repeated sin. Brother Hugo leans closer. I once confessed for laughing at Brother Oswin's haircut. He says. Deadpan. Oswin frowns. And you should have confessed again for repeating it. True. Hugo grins. I'll add it tomorrow. You can almost hear the abbot's sigh before it comes. Confession, brothers, he says mildly, is meant for cleansing, not comedy. But even he can't quite hide the smirk tugging at his lips. The conversation drifts into softer territory, confessions that aren't funny but tender. Brother Gerald admits he sometimes misses his family. Brother Luke confesses he fears dying without ever seeing the sea. The pilgrim listens quietly, eyes lowered, as if he's hearing prayers more than confessions. Historians still argue whether medieval monks truly abandoned worldly longing or merely learned to live beside it. The rule demanded detachment. But longing isn't a door you can simply close. It lingers, like the scent of incense after Mass. Then Brother Martin, voice gentler than usual, says, I once confessed that I envied the swallows. They can fly anywhere and still come home. That one silences even Hugo. You can feel something tender settle over the table, understanding. Maybe even shared homesickness. For all their vows, these men are still human. Still carrying hearts that ache for freedom. For love. For laughter not measured by bells, Clement murmurs. Perhaps that's why confession matters, not to erase our longing, but to remind us it belongs to God. 2. The rain outside grows heavier, and the candle flames bend with every gust sneaking through the cracks. The air feels sacred, not because of ritual, but because of honesty. Brother Roswin, softer now, adds. When I first came here, I confessed that I didn't believe I could be holy. The abbot said holiness isn't belief, it's perseverance. Everyone nods. Even Hugo. Especially Hugo, the pilgrim finally speaks. His voice low. In my travels, I've seen many holy men. The best of them confessed not their sins, but their doubts. The abbot regards him carefully. Then says, doubt confessed his faith renewed. It's the kind of line that might end up copied in a sermon somewhere, centuries later. But tonight, it's just a quiet truth hanging in the steam-filled air. You notice how the monks linger after the meal. Even after the final prayer, no one wants to move. The rain has slowed. The thunder is a memory. And the hall feels wrapped in something fragile, peace. Perhaps. Or the brief comfort of being known. As the abbot finally rises, he says, may your hearts rest lighter tonight. They bow their heads, murmur their amens, and begin to file out. You catch Hugo whispering to Martin, if I dream of bread, does that count as gluttony? Martin replies, only if you wake up chewing. Their laughter follows them down the corridor, fading into the rhythmic sound of raindrops on stone. You stay a moment longer, watching the last candle gutter and die. The smoke curling upward like the unspoken parts of every confession, half vanished, half remembered. And for the first time, you realize the monks aren't so different from anyone trying to live decently in a difficult world. They stumble. They joke. They doubt. And through it all, they keep showing up. By the next evening, the rain has passed, leaving the monastery washed clean and glistening in pale sunlight. The damp earth outside smells rich and new, and the air feels lighter, as if even the stones are breathing easier. But inside, something's shifted. The monks move with a quiet ease. Their laughter softer, their glances friendlier. Maybe the shared confessions worked some invisible grace. Tonight's supper is modest but satisfying: boiled peas, rye bread, and a little cheese. Rare enough to feel like a feast. The pilgrim still sits among them, though he's quieter now, as if sensing his stay is nearly over. The monks talk around him, not at him, the way people do once a guest becomes part of the furniture. Brother Martin breaks the calm. You know, he says between bites, I used to think heaven would be full of gold and music. Now I hope it just smells like the bakery on Fridays. That earns a few knowing laughs. Brother Hugo adds, if heaven's full of gold, I'll still end up polishing it. Give me bread and quiet. Brother Roswin sighs. Bread again. Always bread with you too. You should pray to Saint Honorius, he's the patron of bakers. Martin grins. And who's the patron of those who eat too much bread? Saint Repentia. Hugo quips. The room warms with laughter again. The kind that doesn't need permission. That's your mainstream fact. Saint Honorius of Amiens really was considered the patron saint of bakers. Because, according to legend, when he was consecrated as bishop, his old nurse saw a miraculous sign, a vision of his staff turning into a baking peel, and his loaves multiplying. In medieval monasteries, saints' stories like these weren't just superstition, they were touchstones of everyday life. Monks prayed to saints not just for salvation, but for bread that wouldn't burn, crops that wouldn't fail, or bees that wouldn't swarm away. Tonight, the talk turns toward those saints, their miracles, their oddities, and their sometimes questionable taste in dramatics. Brother Clement recalls the story of Saint Cuthbert, who supposedly spent whole nights praying in the freezing sea while otters warmed his feet. Hugo looks skeptical. If that's true, he says, then those otters were holier than the monks. Clement chuckles. Perhaps they were. The pilgrim joins in. I once heard of Saint Isidore's plough being guided by angels. Imagine explaining that to your abbot. Brother Martin tilts his head thoughtfully. Maybe saints didn't perform miracles. Maybe miracles performed saints. You catch the abbot's faint smile at that one, and here comes your quirky tidbit. Medieval monks occasionally competed, quietly. Of course, over who had the best local saint. A monastery's relics brought pilgrims. And pilgrims brought alms. The more dramatic the miracle, the more popular the shrine. Records show rival abbots accusing each other of exaggerating sainthood for profit, a sort of holy marketing war centuries before billboards. Brother Roswin can't resist turning this into a moral. Faith shouldn't be a contest. He says, true. Hugo says. But if our saint can heal gout, and theirs can only fix toothaches, I'm still lighting my candle here. The laughter returns. But beneath it lies something honest, a recognition that faith, too, is touched by human humor. Historians still argue whether monks genuinely believed in every miracle or accepted them as useful myths for inspiring devotion. Some scholars suggest that, over time, belief and storytelling blurred until no one cared which came first. Maybe truth wasn't the point. Maybe the story was the miracle. As the conversation drifts, Brother Gerald brings up a relic rumor. They say a monastery in Spain has St. James's sandal. Just one sandal. Perhaps he was walking back for the other. Martin says dryly. Even the abbot laughs this time. Shoulders shaking briefly before composure returns. The pilgrim smiles faintly. In truth, brothers, the holiest thing I've seen wasn't a relic or a miracle. It was a monk sharing his last crust with a beggar. That silences the laughter. Clement nods slowly. Sometimes charity is the only miracle left to us, and for a long moment, no one speaks. The rain-washed light slants through the high windows, golden and kind, catching on dust motes that drift like tiny spirits in the air. You can feel it too, that small holiness of ordinary goodness. The miracle of enough. Brother Oswin finally says. Still, I'll take a relic if it helps me finish Vespers awake. Martin chuckles. Maybe Saint Insomnia could intercede for you. They eat on. The talk ebbing into the comfortable quiet of chewing. The scrape of spoons. The rustle of robes. The rhythm of the monastery returns, steady. Timeless. Like the ticking of a heart that has found its pace again. As the meal ends, the abbot rises. Voice calm and low. Brothers, he says, miracles remind us not that the world is strange, but that it's merciful. Let that be enough. They bow, as always, and shuffle toward the chapel for Compline. You linger, watching them go, thinking how these men live on stories, sacred and silly, profound and foolish, and how, somehow, every one of them feeds the same hunger. Outside, the first stars are returning, bright against the wet sky. You step out into the cloister, the scent of rain and bread still mingling in the air, and for a fleeting moment, you understand why they stay, not for miracles, not even for heaven, but for these small, human evenings when the world feels briefly whole. The next day dawns bright and crisp, the kind of morning that makes the stone walls glow like honey. The fields outside the monastery shimmer with dew, and the distant bell tower casts a long shadow over the courtyard. You've begun to notice how sound moves differently here, echoing softly, as though even the air respects the silence. By evening, the monks are gathered once more, bowls in hand, and the talk feels lighter. After the last few nights of confession and saintly miracles, there's a strange sort of camaraderie in the air. A shared ease. You find yourself smiling before you even sit down. The meal tonight is plain barley stew again. But there's a sweetness to it, perhaps from a drizzle of leftover honey. Or maybe it's just that everyone's in better spirits. Brother Martin jokes that the cook must have been bribed by angels. Brother Hugo claims it was his prayers, but tonight, the conversation takes a new turn, not about sin or miracles, but about something far more earthly, dreams. It starts when Brother Gerald admits, "I dreamt of a garden last night. A place I've never seen. There were pears as large as my head." Hugo grins. "You should confess gluttony again." "No," Gerald says, smiling. "It wasn't hunger. It felt like peace, and that's all it takes." Suddenly, the table hums with talk of dreams, strange, vivid, half forbidden. Your mainstream fact: medieval monks placed great importance on dreams. To some, they were divine messages. To others, mere distractions of the flesh. Saint Benedict's rule warned against trusting dreams too much, but still, monks recorded them in the margins of manuscripts, puzzled over them, and sometimes even used them to guide decisions. Brother Clement recalls a famous story of Saint Bernard, who dreamt the Virgin handed him milk from her breast, a vision said to symbolize divine wisdom. Hugo tries not to laugh but fails spectacularly. Earning a sharp look from Oswin, Clement sighs. Patient as ever. Symbolism. Brother. It's called symbolism. The table chuckles. Then Brother Luke, shy and thoughtful, says, "I dream often of my childhood home. The fields. My mother's voice. Is that vanity?" Oswin shakes his head. "No. Memory. Vanity is when you dream of being Pope." Martin smirks. "So if I dream of not being Pope, is that humility?" Even the abbot can't help a small, weary smile. Your quirky tidbit: one monastery in the 12th century actually kept a dream register, a parchment scroll where monks recorded their dreams for interpretation. Most were mundane: "I chased a goose. I saw a broken candle." But a few described angels or visions of light. Some were seen as warnings of plague or famine. Others as signs of personal salvation. "Once," says Hugo, leaning in conspiratorially, "I dreamt Brother Oswin grew wings." Oswin blinks. "Wings?" "Yes. You flew over the cloister roof, shouting about proper Latin declensions. The laughter that follows is so loud it nearly drowns the sound of rain returning outside. When it quiets," Clement muses, "perhaps dreams are the only time we let the soul wander free." Gerald nods. "Or when the body stops pretending it doesn't have one." Historians still argue whether medieval monks saw dreams as spiritual experiences or as dangerous temptations. The line between revelation and illusion was fine, and many monks feared that even holy dreams could be traps laid by demons. In one famous debate, a Cistercian scholar claimed that the devil dresses his lies in the language of angels. Brother Oswin, ever the cautious one, mutters, "Dreams make men foolish. Better to sleep without them." Martin grins. "Then you must be the holiest among us, for you've never dreamed of anything fun." Oswin glares. "I dream of order and silence." "Ah," says Hugo, "a nightmare." Then, they burst into laughter again. The kind that rolls like thunder, bouncing off the stone walls until even the abbot's stern face cracks into a grin. But as the laughter fades, Clement's voice lowers. "When I was young," he says, "I dreamt of the Christ child walking through snow. He left no footprints." Silence follows, reverent and still. What do you think it meant? Someone whispers. Clement looks down at his bowl. That holiness leaves no mark but changes everything it touches. The room exhales all at once, as though releasing something fragile and sacred. The abbot, after a long pause, says, "Perhaps dreams are the places where faith remembers it's alive." He stands, signaling the end of the meal. "Sleep well, brothers. And if you dream, listen kindly." As the monks rise, benches scraping softly, the pilgrim catches your eye. "Do you dream?" he asks quietly. You think for a moment. Maybe you do. Maybe you dream of worlds like this one, half real, half remembered, where silence holds stories and laughter hides prayer. Later, As you walk the cloister under the dripping eaves, you notice how the moonlight turns puddles into silver mirrors. You almost expect to see the monk streams reflected there, saints, bread, otters, and all, floating gently on the surface of the world they never quite left behind, and in that moment, you understand what they're really searching for at these quiet suppers, not answers, not miracles, just the feeling that life, in all its strangeness, still whispers to them when the world goes still. By the next evening, the rhythm of monastery life feels almost hypnotic again, the bells, the prayers, the faint clatter of wooden spoons. Yet something has changed in the air. Like the subtle difference between silence and stillness. The pilgrim has announced he'll be leaving in 2 days' time. And though no one says it outright, the monks will miss him. His stories have cracked open their evenings, letting in laughter and questions that hadn't echoed through the refectory in years. Supper tonight is lentil stew, thick and peppery. The monks file in, robes swaying, faces caught between fatigue and fondness. As they settle, Brother Martin raises his cup in mock solemnity. To our guest, he says, who's taught us that not every tale worth hearing is in Latin. A murmur of approval circles the table. The pilgrim bows his head slightly. And to my hosts, he replies, who've shown me that silence can be a conversation. Brother Hugo nods thoughtfully. You'd be surprised how many words we fit into silence. Everyone laughs. But there's truth beneath it. In monasteries like this one, silence was a kind of language. The monks developed entire systems of hand signs to communicate without speaking. A raised eyebrow, a flick of the wrist, a subtle nod, all part of an invisible grammar. That's your mainstream fact. Cistercian and Benedictine monks used complex sign languages long before formal deaf communication systems existed. Some monasteries had hundreds of distinct gestures, allowing monks to request food, tools, or even joke silently. A good monk could carry on a conversation without uttering a word. Brother Oswin, perhaps feeling playful, lifts his spoon and mimics one of these signs, a twist of the wrist that means bread. Martin immediately responds with another that means more. Within moments, half the table is silently talking, hands fluttering like candle flames. The abbot watches, bemused, then murmurs, so much for our vow of silence. Martin grins. We're just evolving. Laughter ripples again. But when it fades, the pilgrim asks quietly, do you ever wish you could speak freely, say everything you think? Just once? The question lands softly but deeply. Clement tilts his head. Sometimes silence protects truth better than words. Gerald nods. And sometimes it hides it. A pause follows, one of those silences that feels heavier than noise. You can sense the monks turning the thought over in their minds. Historians still argue whether medieval monks found silence liberating or oppressive. Some described it as a path to inner peace, a way to hear God's whisper. Others confessed that it made them restless, even lonely, especially in the long winters when the world seemed to shrink to 4 echoing walls. Brother Hugo finally breaks the tension. I once tried to pray in silence, he says, but my stomach prayed louder. Even Oswin chuckles at that, but beneath the humor, something tender lingers, the recognition that silence can be both sanctuary and prison. The pilgrim, who's been watching them all, says softly, in my travels, I met monks who lived alone in deserts. They said silence becomes a friend if you feed it kindness. Clement smiles faintly. And what if you feed it fear, then? Says the pilgrim. It eats you. The abbot, ever steady, folds his hands. Perhaps that's why we eat together. So the silence doesn't swallow us whole. It's a simple thought, but it settles over the table like a benediction. They eat in near quiet after that, not because they've run out of words, but because they've remembered how to listen. You hear spoons clink softly, the rustle of habits, the faint whistle of wind through the cracks. Every sound feels alive, deliberate. Your quirky tidbit, in some monasteries, silence wasn't total. Certain monks were allowed to break it once a week to share words of edification. In a few rare cases, the abbot even appointed a jester monk of sorts, a brother permitted to lighten moods with humor. These figures walked a fine line between comic relief and spiritual danger. Laughter, after all, was powerful medicine, but too much of it risked turning into vanity. Brother Martin, perhaps unconsciously, plays that role here. He leans toward Hugo and whispers, "If silence is golden, mine must be copper, cheap but shiny." Hugo grins. "More like tin. It dents easily." They both nearly snort into their soup. Drawing a sharp look from Oswin that only makes it worse, the abbot sighs. But there's warmth in his eyes. "Brothers," he says quietly, "silence isn't the absence of sound. It's the presence of listening," and somehow, everyone understands exactly what he means. As the meal ends, the bell for Compline sounds, low, solemn, familiar. The monks rise, benches scraping in unison. The pilgrim lingers for a moment, watching them with something like affection. "Your silence," he says, "has more stories in it than most towns I've seen." The abbot inclines his head. "Perhaps that's why people come to tell theirs." The pilgrim smiles. "Then I've done my duty." Outside, the night air smells of rosemary and damp stone. You follow them through the cloister, their footsteps soft on the flagstones. The rain has stopped again, leaving tiny droplets on the vines that catch the moonlight like beads of glass. In the chapel, the monks' chanting begins, low, rhythmic, timeless. And now, after hearing their laughter and confessions and quiet rebellions, the chant sounds different to you. Not mechanical or distant, but deeply human, men trying, in their own way, to speak to the divine through measured sound and sacred stillness. For a moment, you close your eyes. The silence between their voices feels alive, humming. The whole building seems to breathe with them. You realize, then, that the monks don't fear silence at all. They've simply learned how to fill it, with memory, with humor, with care. And as the last note fades into the vaulted ceiling, it feels less like an ending and more like a long, steady heartbeat in the dark. The pilgrim leaves at dawn. You wake to the sound of the gate creaking open and footsteps crunching through frost. The courtyard is silvered with early light, and a faint mist curls above the garden. A few monks stand by the archway, Brother Martin, Clement, the abbot, each offering a nod. Not quite a farewell, more a quiet benediction. The pilgrim turns, cloak fluttering. "May your silence stay kind," he says, then vanishes down the muddy road, his shape swallowed by fog. You stand beside the brothers, feeling the odd emptiness that follows a guest's departure. The world seems to hold its breath. Even the bell waits a heartbeat longer before its morning peal begins, reverberating through stone and soul alike. At breakfast, things feel both the same and subtly altered. The benches, the bread, the steaming bowls of pottage, it's all as before. But now, when Brother Hugo cracks a dry joke, or Martin smirks at Clement's frown, there's a faint new rhythm to it. The monastery feels looser, lighter, as spoons scrape against bowls. Martin says, "Do you think travelers tell stories about us too?" Oswin snorts. "Unlikely. We'd bore even the saints." Hugo waggles a brow. "Then at least they'd fall asleep faster." That earns the quiet ripple of laughter that's become the monastery's unofficial grace note. Clement leans forward. "Perhaps that's how we stay remembered, not through grand deeds, but through the quiet moments people whisper about later. It's the kind of thought that would make good sermon material, though none of them frame it that way." Historians still argue whether medieval monks saw themselves as part of history or outside it. Some believed their isolation was timeless, a deliberate stepping out of worldly chronology. Others, reading old letters and marginal notes, see men acutely aware of time, recording eclipses, plagues, kings' names, and even gossip with meticulous care. Their silence wasn't detachment, it was witness. Brother Gerald, polishing a wooden bowl, adds, "Maybe the pilgrim will forget our names but remember our laughter. That's enough, and that's the thing. Isn't it? Even centuries later, laughter leaves echoes. Some abbeys still have scratched graffiti in their dining halls, doodles of animals, rude caricatures of abbots, even a sketch of a monk riding a pig. Scholars think the drawings were made by novices sneaking in after hours. A reminder, holiness and humor were never enemies." That's your quirky tidbit tonight. You can almost picture it, the same brothers you've spent these long, candlelit evenings with, sneaking a bit of charcoal and scrawling a joke before prayers. The medieval world, often painted as grey and joyless, was teeming with small acts of mischief and mercy. Later, when the day's labor begins, copying texts, tending the garden, mending habits, you sense the refectory's chatter lingering in every corner. The monastery hums with life, not despite its silence, but because of it. Each sound, the scrape of quill, the strike of chisel, the flutter of pigeon wings, is part of an unseen choir. The abbot crosses the yard slowly, hands clasped behind him. You follow his gaze toward the hills, where sunlight glints on dew-soaked grass. "Strange," he murmurs. "How quiet feels louder after company." You nod, even though he doesn't see you. There's truth in that. Silence isn't the absence of noise, but the echo of what's been shared. As evening falls again, the monastery gathers for supper one last time in your company. The room smells faintly of herbs and oil lamps. When the food is served, barley stew with sprigs of thyme, Martin raises his spoon. "To silence," he says. "That lets the stories breathe." Every monk joins the gesture. You do too, and as you taste the simple stew, the flavors carry everything you've seen: the candles, the frost, the laughter, the whispered confessions between mouthfuls of bread. You've learned that medieval monks didn't dine in grim quiet, but in a living hush, a space for thought, prayer, and, occasionally, a well-placed joke about turnips. The night deepens. The candles burn low. One by one, the monks file out toward the chapel for their final prayers. You stay seated a little longer, letting the stillness settle. Somewhere outside, an owl calls, a sound older than every hymn in their books. The abbot pauses by the doorway. "You'll find," he says softly, "that silence travels with you. It's never a burden. If you treat it gently." Then he leaves you alone in the fading candlelight. And now, as the echo of their footsteps fades, the monastery drifts into stillness again. The refectory cools. The last candle sighs out, and the world softens into that familiar medieval dark, dense, slow, endless. You breathe in the quiet, noticing how even your heartbeat feels slower here, as though time itself has taken a vow. Outside, mist settles on the cloisters, curling like thin smoke along the arches. The night carries no music, only the distant drip of water from the eaves and the low hum of wind through the garden herbs. Everything feels wrapped in a kind of peace you didn't expect, one born not of absence, but of balance. The monks' laughter, their confessions, their silences, they all weave together now. Part of the same gentle tapestry. You realize, with a small smile, that their world wasn't so far from yours. They wrestled with boredom, faith, hunger, and humor, the same blend of longing and contentment that fills every human day. So, as you lie back, let that sense of calm sink in. Imagine the soft flicker of a single candle still burning somewhere in the abbey, a steady glow against centuries of night. The monks are asleep now, but their quiet devotion hums on, a kind of lullaby whispered through stone. Let it guide your breathing, in and out, steady, simple, and when you finally drift, let the silence follow you, not heavy, not lonely, just gentle. Sweet dreams, traveler.